Okay, so this is obviously a fresh butt joint, but we'll assume that it's a joint that's gone bad on somebody. We're rarely doing new construction, but when we're doing repaint, sometimes we see a crack joint we got to repair. So we've already torn our tape out. It can be kind of a pain sometimes. It depends on how many coats of paint are embedded in there. But we got to cut it out and then maybe take a 5-in-1 to pry that tape out and peel it out. And then once we get that out, you got to vacuum that joint out. So we'll assume that we're at that point right now. So this is a butt joint, meaning these two ends are flush together. So that means that when I put tape on, it's going to be a bump. And the goal with taping or doing any kind of repair is to make it so that that bump is so gradual that it doesn't catch any shadows. You don't see that change in that variation in the hump. Some joints, on a 4x8 sheet, the 8-foot side is going to be beveled where the tape actually embeds into the surface a little bit, so you don't have to spread out your mud as far. But for the most part, with any kind of joint that we're going to be repairing, we have to treat it as if it's a butt joint. So that means we get to have probably 10 inches on each side at least for a fan width to make it so that we can't see that hump. Get our compound put in there, take our sponge, and then I still kind of want to gradually mix this in here because the drill is going to kind of, once you start that drill up, it's going to want to spread this stuff all over the place. So I want to get it started using my 1.5-inch blade. And then we'll actually do the mixing with the drill. And once I can kind of get rid of most of this powder. And we'll just take this drill in here like this. Probably be putting this on the ground here. Give it a spin to get that stuff off. And then I'll go ahead and stick this in my water bucket. Clean off that blade. So my first step is I'm going to get some mud put on here. This is still that 20-minute joint compound that I had mixed up just a minute ago. And if you've waited too long, you want to mix up some new mud. If this has started to dry out on you, you want to mix new mud up because when you embed this, you need this mud to be moist enough and wet enough to act as an adhesive for this tape. If it's too dry, you're going to start to get areas where it's blistering, and we can't have that. So now I take one end and I'm kind of just pushing this mud out. And you don't want to squeeze all of it out. You want to leave a little bit in there. See right here, it's a little bit more difficult because I got this table that's in the way, but I'm just trying to get that out at the end there. So and because I'm using quickset mud, I can now also do a coat over the top of this. If this was joint compound, I'd have to let that dry for a day before I come back and do another coat. So that's one of the advantages of using a quickset. So now I'm just gonna I have quite a bit of mud on here. that I gotta fan out. So what I'm doing is I'm using a little bit more pressure on the outside edge to try to fan it out. And then right after you get that patch applied, or your first and second coat of quickset mud put on, make sure you get a fan blowing on the surface or in the room that you're working in. And you may want to turn the heat up in the room as well, just to get that drying down a little bit faster. Now I'm about ready to top it off with the +3 joint compound. It's been about 45 minutes since I had put on this 20-minute mud, had a fan blowing on it. Still slightly damp, but it's ready to get top coated. So I'm gonna just take my blade and run over the top of it here just to knock off any high points. You don't really have to sand at this point, but you do want to do this because it's gonna help your final coat of mud go on a little bit smoother. Okay, so just like mixing the powder form of the quickset, you have to mix up a little bit of the joint compound to loosen it up a little bit. You can see that this is just way too stiff to work with right now. So we're gonna get some added to this pan. And I'm just scooping this out with a 3-inch blade, I believe. I'm gonna be careful with this lid right here. You don't wanna get any mud built up on that lid so this top can still provide a seal. So that should be good. I'm gonna take a little bit of water using a sponge, get it added here. And then I'll try that and get it mixed up with the drill. I'm gonna add just a little bit more water here. Spin it off in the bucket. Get that blade cleaned off. I can take my sponge and clean off the rest of it. So this is kind of the consistency that I'm looking for. Just barely falling off the knife. Okay, so for this final coat of mud, what I have is a 10-inch knife now, and I'm trying to go on the side of a seam here, the side of a butt joint, about 10 inches on each side of it. So right now we're sitting at probably about 5 inches on each side of it, roughly. We're basically going to double that, and that's going to make it so that this hump is so subtle that you're not going to see any shadows, and you shouldn't see this hump at all. Same thing here. This is a patch where it's about this size right now, so it's probably about 3 or 4 inches, and we're going to basically bring it out to here, all the way around this patch. Because we're using a sample board, we obviously can't come all the way over here, but more or less this whole piece is going to end up getting a coat of mud on it, except for maybe something up here. You're not usually going to be dealing with it where you're replacing a butt joint and you're replacing a hole or installing a California patch right next to it, but I'll just go ahead and show you how to put this on. So I'm going to scoop some mud out like this, and then I don't want to have it go on with it fully loaded on both sides from end to end. So I'm going to scrape off a little bit of mud on the very end and also here on the very end and work with that, because now I don't have to worry about tails as I'm applying this coat of mud. And I'll just get it applied like that, scoop it out again, scrape some off of this end, some off of this end, get some more applied. I'm going to go over to this other side, do the same thing. You know, the joint's right about here, so I'm starting with my end of my knife right on top of that joint more or less. Getting it spread out over the top. I'm starting with like a slightly steeper angle and then flattening my wrist as I go. So right now I'm just trying to get the mud on there. I'm not trying to make it pretty yet. I just want to get kind of equal coverage throughout. It's my goal. And now what I'm going to do, now that it's on there and it's relatively uniform, I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on this side of the knife so it tapers off that end. And then put a little bit of pressure on this side of the knife so it tapers off this end. And now I can kind of just run it right down the middle. I'll go one more pass here. And that's about it. And have a little bit of tailings that they're going to have to just knife off with their 6-inch blade. And then we'll just lightly sand this. Make sure you get a fan blowing on the surface or in the room that you're working in so it can dry down overnight. This is kind of what this looks like after it's dried, so hopefully you can see this, but there's little bubbles that might appear in this joint compound after it's dried overnight. Pretty common and fairly hard to avoid, but we'll get this sanded. When I sand this, I'm not trying to sand down through to the bottom of this bubble, the bottom of this crater, because then I'm going to essentially be sanding off all this mud. I'm going to sand it off, and then where I need to, if there's just a few pockets of bubbles, I might just hit it with lightweight spackle, but since I have joint compound ready to use right now, I'll just skim over these spots real quick with the joint compound, and then this patch will pretty much be done. So knife off some of these high spots from these tailings real quick, kind of reduces a little bit of the sanding. So I've got medium grit 5mm foam pad on here. Seems to help a little bit with the dust extraction. But we have a patch right here, so this is kind of like the high point, and then it tapers off all the way around again, and then we have a joint right here, high point right here, and then it kind of tapers off. So I'm going to go easy on the sanding at the high point, and then kind of gradually, I'm trying to get this as smooth as possible, but I'm not trying to sand through all the bubbles. We'll just have to give it a light skim coat after I get done sanding. So I'm going to start with the sander on the surface, hit the trigger. I do press this down one level when I'm sanding drywall, just because the standard speed is a little bit too fast. One of the best ways to look at a joint to make sure that you're not going to see a shadow is to just check it with a knife. I only have a 6-inch knife with me here. 10-inch knife would be better to check it. But if you see any major gaps right there in between the joint and the tapered end, if there's a gap right in the middle here, then it's probably got to get filled with a little bit of mud. Now we're applying a tight coat of mud. So that means that we're putting it on and then basically scraping it all off, just leaving what's needing to get filled inside those craters caused from those bubbles. And then we'll get a fan blowing on the surface so it can dry down in about 15 minutes. We'll lightly sand it again and then apply our primer. So this is kind of what you're looking for after you install a butt joint, what the repair should look like. You don't really see it at all. Thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in learning more, we have videos about installing a California patch and also about our process for painting interior walls.